Carolyn Paulamus was murdered last night.
Suspected by his friends.
Why didn't you tell me about you and Carolyn?
You think I killed her?
Betrayed by his past.
She's dead, and you're still obsessing.
Harrison Ford, Brian Dennehy, Raul Julia, Bonnie Bedelia, Paul Winfield, and Greta Scacchi.
No deal. No plea. I want my life back, unstained.
From the best-selling novel, Presumed Innocent, rated R. Starts Friday, July 27th at a theater near you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Pantheon Plus. My name is Jerome Cuson. Thank you so much for listening again this week. You can find me on Twitter for now at JeromeC1985. Please leave a 4 or 5 star review so as to help people discover the great work that we are doing here at Pantheon Plus, as well as the real world. Tonight we are discussing 1990s Presumed Innocent, as we are continuing our look at Harrison Ford. This is week 3 of 4. We will be discussing kind of another unheralded, perhaps underrated Harrison Ford movie. Again, support us here at The Real World. Or I should say Matt and Ben are discussing the Transformers franchise. Kevin Ford and I have been discussing a lot of shows that have been canceled too soon. And most recently, we discussed the 4th and final season of Barry, which Barry, if there's one thing Barry is not, is that he is presumed innocent. That is for sure. My co-host, as always, is Brian. You can find him on Twitter for now, at Brian DeBrain. And Brian, I have to say that I have never been anticipating your reaction to an ending more than Presumed Innocence. So if you have not listened, or if you have not watched or read the book Presumed Innocent, please do that before watching or listening to this podcast, because we are about to spoil the shit out of it. So Brian, how did you feel as you were watching this ending?
You know what? I wanted, spoiler alert, I wanted Brian Dennehy to be the killer. And I so wanted that, because I think as an audience member going through this journey in the story, it's like you want him to be the bad guy because he comes off as such a piece of crap. But spoiler alert, it's the wife. And it's like, it should be so obvious, because the way she's so like casual about the fact that her husband had this affair, and she seems so like calm and nonchalant about it. Should have been a red flag. It should have been a red flag immediately, and I did not pick up on it. And that's a strike on me, because I usually pick up on these things, and I just so wanted it to be Brian Dennehy, but I ignored some of those things, and then you ignored some of the other things in the background. Yeah, and then you start putting 2 and 2 together in terms of the timeline and some of the scenes, and everything starts clicking in that moment, and then she does the monologue. I would have done the monologue a little differently, because, again, it's become the Incredibles complaint, because I felt like she just kept going and going, but, you know, she explained in every detail that she was the killer, spoiler alert, and, yeah, that got me. What really got me is, like, of course, like, the visual of him, you know, working with the tools and shit, and immediately I thought, oh, wait a minute. And then, because you remember back to the autopsy report that there was a blunt object that was never found, and all of a sudden this fucking hatchet appears with blood on it and hair, and he looks at it, and then everything starts clicking, and I was like, oh, the wife did it. Like, I can imagine being an adult in 1990 sitting in a theater on like a Saturday night on a date and having this reaction in a very adult crowd with no kids. I think there'd be so many gasps in the audience at that point. I would have just enjoyed the moment. And that's kind of rare where you have an audience just gasp the whole time. Like, I think that, oh God, the one time it did happen was in Glorious Bastards, where Christoph Waltz basically goes into that restaurant and sees the blonde girl. And the blonde girl has a flashback. And then I literally hear people in the back go, does he know? Does he know? Does he know it's her? Does he know it's her? Like, I heard that in the theater. So I can imagine just the theater in 1990, everyone going, oh, it's the wife, oh, it's the wife, oh, it's the wife. Like, in that exact moment where everything starts clicking for the audience. And I think, yeah, because like I hate to say this, but this movie was a fun watch, and I know it's kind of like it's a murder thing and there's a rape and all that kind of thing, but like it just the journey of the story, it felt like you were the detective in this case and you're kind of like figuring it out. And I think that's the sign of a great murder mystery, is when you kind of play the role of the detective and the journey plays out with you. And in this case, it just played out so well. I just wish that she was on the stand doing this, because it seems like she was ready to testify on the stand without anyone knowing that she was the killer and saved her husband on the stand, but that didn't happen because of the mistrial, which we'll get into. But some good twists and turns in this, and I love the cast. Love the cast.
How badly did you want to see a new Die Hard with Bonnie Bedelia in the lead saving her husband, John McClane?
Dude, it made me think like she was such a waste, especially in 2, which we'll talk about this summer, by the way.
So here's what I want to know. I want to know what William Atherton's character is after Die Hard 2, because we never see him. Perhaps a blunt object was used by Mrs. McClane on him. That's what I'm thinking about now. I will never get that out of my head now.
Oh man. Yeah. She's so good in this. It's
she's
very
really good. Like,
it's subtle.
She doesn't get a lot to do until the monologue, but yeah, she is so good. I think she's very sarcastic. Like, I think she plays this role to perfection. And again, I think this is kind of an underdeveloped wife role, just like we talked about last week with Helen Mirren. The difference is that this wife gets one hell of a payoff. And
but I think it's on purpose, right? Right?
Oh, because, yeah. I mean, it's clearly on purpose.
Yeah, so that way you don't suspect her, which totally happened to me. So I get it.
You get a lot of these movies in the 80s and 90s. You think about Fatal Attraction. You think about a number of movies Michael Douglas did in the 80s and 90s. And you think about these erotic thrillers where there is this kind of, okay, this guy has an affair. Now what's going to happen with his wife and his family? And the whole world is being torn down. And you get a lot of this in the 80s and 90s. And Karina Longworth on her podcast, You Must Remember This, has done a fantastic job the last 2 years of talking about these issues. I would strongly recommend. She does talk a little bit about Presumed Innocent, but she talks about a number of movies that were influenced by this one, as well as the way that this movie was influenced by previous kind of erotic thrillers. So I would strongly recommend that people go ahead and listen to that podcast. But for the purposes of our journey through looking at Harrison Ford's filmography, this is something also very different and unique compared to Jack Ryan or Indiana Jones or Han Solo. This is Harrison Ford as, I'm not sure, I kind of a yuppie, I would say, kind of that, both this idealist lawyer, but also somebody who has succumbed to the temptation of an affair. And I think this is a prototypical 80s or 90s movie. And if you can believe it, Brian, I was, because I always put the TV spots, kind of a quick TV spot of the trailer at the beginning of each of our podcasts, as you know. And for this one, Brian, this was a summer 1990 release. This is what a summer blockbuster was in 1990.
Yeah, times are much different now because we're waiting for Mission Impossible, which is $300 million probably, something like that. This is way less than that, with no explosions, all talking, no special effects. I think the most we got was a punch to the face, because we didn't see the murder. It's all pictures and just post what happened in the murder scene, and that's it. We don't actually see the murder or anything. It's not as gruesome or graphic as the murder in Witness, that's for sure. So I would say, yeah, like as a budget for what this is, and for the amount of money it made, and like the execution of it all, it's like recently we talked about Air, being a talkie movie and being kind of on that vibe, and I miss these kind of movies, man. Maybe I just don't watch enough of these Netflix movies that come straight to Netflix and there's all talking and stuff like that. I don't know. I just kind of miss this kind of vibe to movies. Like I want, like I mentioned before, like I can only imagine being an audience member in 1990 for the reveal, and how awesome that would have been in a room full of like adults on a Saturday night. You know what I mean? So yeah, this movie is pretty fucking great, and I love the structure of it. And like I mentioned, the cast and everything. It's just, there's a lot going for this movie. In terms of the casting of Harrison Ford, I don't know. You kind of feel it's a little bit of a miscast. I see what they're going for, but I feel like this character of Rusty I think it feels like he was a nerd as a kid that grew up as a lawyer, and all of a sudden this really hot girl came on to him for the first time, and he's not used to that, even though he's got this beautiful wife, which is kind of questionable because like their relationship, I don't know. It seems like it's very much on the monetization of like the monetization side of the things in terms of their relationship.
I would say that I would classify their relationship as kind of being in a rut. I don't necessarily know that they're going to get divorced, but I would say that they're probably a prototypical marriage of that type where they have been married for a number of years and they have a kid and they're kind of trying to make it work. And like he's been able to do everything he wants with his career. She hasn't been able to do anything that she wants because she was number one in her class, still hasn't finished her dissertation, is finally able to do so and is able to get a teaching job at the end of this movie. So I think you're getting a lot of, okay, this person hasn't achieved everything she wants to. And I think that's part of the reason why she does what she does. Like, I think if the way I would classify it is that she kind of just snaps. Like, there's been a couple of projects about Kennedy Montgomery, and she was a housewife who basically stabbed someone with an axe like 47 times. And I think it's a similar principle with this movie. Like, she just had a moment where she utterly and totally snapped. And I think this was perhaps a little bit more pre-planned, and maybe she wanted to teach her husband a lesson of some sort. But like, you're clearly getting a lot of those vibes. And for me, this is a John Grisham novel. This is legal pulp. I mean, I don't think that this is necessarily plausible in any way. But here's the one thing I do want to say, Brian. When I look at the Brian Dennehy character and when I look at the prosecutor that actually wins the election, they're screwed, man. Like, this city is completely screwed. They have incompetent prosecutors, and unless Rusty decides to run for office, or unless Raul Julia's character decides to run for office, they're kind of screwed.
That kind of plays into the darker ending. It is kind of a dark ending, but with that perspective, I thought about that too. Like, there's some really shady things going on, and it kind of gets darker because Brian Dennehy, I mean, is he really corrupt? Probably, but to the extent that he would murder, I don't know. I thought he would. I thought he was, but I guess not. But some of these characters are very shady. It feels like a gut.
Raymond Horgan does not get his hands dirty. He would have somebody killed for him. He would never actually do the deed himself. He is
okay. That's where I made my mistake. That's where I made my mistake. So
he is the prototypical backslapping politician of this era. Like, he is a cliched type. You would see him in like a Chicago or a Boston. Like, this is just who he is.
Yeah, this city has this Gotham City feel to it. And unfortunately, the character of I'm forgetting her name, but the one that was murdered, the victim, she was trying to be on this crusade, right, to kind of change things, and like this idea of like, let's put our best lawyers on our hardest cases instead of the opposite, which they were doing, and putting their weakest lawyers on their hardest cases, just for just to not mess with that line and try to cross over the line and piss people off. So. It's got this, this Batman vibe to it, but there is no Batman, basically. And it's just this is kind of like around the time of, let's just say around the time of Batman's parents, the Waynes. And let's just pretend they're kind of alive during this kind of time period. And that's kind of where you can kind of put this movie in perspective, I think. And I think it works a lot because that's kind of the vibe I'm getting. Because with the idea of these corrupt, like the judge is corrupt, the lawyers are corrupt, and we know all these people are corrupt, and by the end of it all, we're just kind of like, okay, well, we're happy Harrison Ford didn't commit the murder. So I guess that's the happy part of the ending, even though the ending is very dark within itself.
Absolutely. So I think we have to talk about the supporting performances in this movie. I think that the flavor that is added by the various supporting players, I think that's what makes this movie. I think getting into the mechanics of the plot, you have Carolyn Polimas. She is murdered off camera, and she is basically dead at the beginning. And there's a lot of machinations with what Rusty is doing, and he is acting a little bit suspicious in terms of running the case. And eventually, because of political machinations, like, that's the way that I ultimately come to believe, is that at the end of the day, I don't know that they actually believe that he did it, but because Raymond Horgan is pissed off at Rusty for not helping him enough with the election. He's ready to throw him under the bus. And I think Tommy Melito and Nico Della Guardia, like, they're ready to throw him under the bus because he's political opposition. So that's where I kind of come down. Like, they don't know, like, they just have this piece of physical evidence, and that's kind of what they're hanging their hat on. And that is what is driving this plot. And you get various details about Carolyn's murder. It's pretty grisly. It's pretty awful. And clearly, the person who did this is not only very guilty, but perhaps could be considered some sort of a psychopath if you really just break it down. But we run into various characters. The Raymond Horgan character, Brian Dennehy, is so great. You also get John Spencer as Detective Dan Labranzer. I think the way I always see John Spencer is he's a lawyer in LA law. He is the chief of staff, Leo McGarry, in the West Wing. Like, this is kind of who he is. He's this very like upper class waspy type. And in this movie, he's a shadier character. Like, you could totally see him like in a noir where he's just like this private detective who's looking at the seedier elements of the city. He's so great in this. You also, about an hour into this movie, you get Raul Julia, the great Raul Julia, as Alejandro Sandy Stern, who is the defense attorney for Harrison Ford's character. We're gonna get to another one that I know Brian really appreciated in a second. But I mean, look, Raul Julia has this run. He does Gomez Addams in the Addams Family. He's in Street Fighter, and then he passes away, and it's so unfortunate because even though he was in his 50s, he died at the age of 54. It feels like in the 90s is when his career is finally starting to take off, just in terms of being in these bigger movies. And I have to say, in my mind, Rusty as a character is kind of a nothing burger. His character doesn't really evolve. I think Harrison Ford very much underplays it. I'm not sure if he was the best casting. In my mind, Brian, Sandy Stern is the character you want to play as an actor because he's the one that gets the big courtroom scenes. And Raul Julia is tremendous.
Yeah, Raul Julia, man, Jesus Christ, he is. God, I kept thinking he would be in the top 3 of all time. I mean, he's in the top 15, maybe, I think, of all time, just based on his career alone. But if he didn't die at the age that he did, I think he'd be in the top 3. And I'm totally being honest about that because I described this movie to a friend of mine who he's not really familiar with like these legal drama movies, but I was like, it's got Gomez Addams in. He's like the one from the 90s. Like, yeah. I was like, dude, he's amazing, dude. And then I was like, yeah, imagine him as a lawyer. And he's like, dude, did he bring on that Latin charm? And he's like, no, he not necessarily the Latin charm, but he definitely carried it, man. And yeah, just Raul Julia as a lawyer, God, that's just perfect because you know he's gonna kill it, and he fucking killed it, man. And probably the best performance, which is saying a lot because I felt like Brian Dennehy was just this monstrous performance in the beginning. And I kind of mentioned, I texted this to Jerome, but I think when Brian Dennehy kind of, he died recently, right? But in terms of like that over the top, loud, strong, big, like kind of like character actor that Brian Dennehy was, I think Vincent D'Onofrio has taken that mantle perfectly. Because I think in another, if you had Brian Dennehy younger in like the 2000s, he could have been Kingpin easily could have been Kingpin. But now we have Vincent D'Onofrio in the modern era, but you can kind of see that similarity. They both bring it in different ways. So again, we talk about remakes and all that kind of thing. If you did resume this today, I definitely see Vincent D'Onofrio in that role, like 100%. And I actually see Giancarlo Esposito in the role that Raul Julia has. So that's kind of where I am at. And I feel like Giancarlo Esposito kind of filled that mantle as well, where he kind of, Raul Julia in terms of that kind of like great character actor with the Hispanic heritage that can play these different kind of roles, not necessarily Hispanic. But I could easily see like the role that Giancarlo Esposito has in The Boys kind of replaced with Raul Julia, and it's like the same dynamic, but even better. So that's kind of where I'm at on that. But just seeing them like play off each other in the courtroom scene, God, that was like a dream for me. Because like in terms of like, as a person who loves movies and loves character actors like that from a certain era, seeing those two perform was just like magic, and it was so magical to see that. and it's kind of like a smart mark thing to say, and it's not going to affect a lot of people the same way. But if you appreciate the works that you saw, like in Tommy Boy and Addams Family, and like I mentioned before years ago on a podcast, but The Death of a Salesman live performance that I saw in high school that was recorded with the Brian Dennehy in the lead, tremendous role for him to play. So just seeing him in these two together was just so awesome.
Totally agreed. And Paul Winfield read the novel. Of course, this is an adaptation of the novel Presumed Innocent. And Paul Winfield read the novel in the late 80s, loved it, said to his agent that if a movie was to ever be made, he wanted the role of the judge. I totally get that. I could totally see why you would want him to play this judge, because although he is corrupt and also likely slept with the poor victim, he gets a lot to do, and basically he gets to bitch slap the prosecution for most of this. Like, the way he just lays waste them at the end is pretty incredible stuff. Like, the prosecution is absolutely incompetent in this movie, and it is very Alan J. Pakula to have a completely corrupt and incompetent political system, and you could definitely see why, even though this is kind of a pulpy legal thriller, you can see why he was drawn to this. And I mean, Alan J. Pakula, just from a directing perspective, is way overqualified to do this, as is the cinematographer Gordon Willis. Gordon Willis also did the cinematography for All the President's Men. So yeah, I mean, they just dressed this movie up very well. The city feels very lived in. The courtroom is lit up tremendously well. Just, again, vastly overqualified people. They do a tremendous job. But Paul Winfield, who I know I've enjoyed him in like small roles in Terminator and Mars Attacks. He is having so much fun.
At first I was like, oh, this is a judge that takes no shit and is like a realist and like will not be outwitted by the prosecution and what they're trying to do. And he could easily see through their tactics and shit like that and called them out on it. And which kind of builds up to his big mistrial declaration towards the end. But I just was kind of shocked when they revealed that he was on the take, and I was like, I didn't want to believe it because the way he's portraying this judge is like this, like, take no shit kind of judge, you know what I mean? But I guess it just means everyone's on the take. I don't know, but it made me think immediately, like, why they had this specific scene. So do you remember the lottery scene where they drew the judge?
I do, yes.
Do you think he was rigged?
I think it's certainly possible. It could have been like when Vince McMahon picked out Steve Austin to be number one in the 1999 Royal Rumble.
Listen, I didn't think of that until they revealed that Little was on the take, and then I was like, oh, he rigged the fucking thing. That's why why show that anyway? You know what I mean? Like, it's for a movie like this, scenes have to be very specific. Every scene counts for a director like this. Some directors don't give a shit. They'll throw in extra random scenes that have nothing to do with the plot. Something like that was very specific. And now I was like, oh, that's why they showed it, because he rigged the fucking lottery. So that's my perspective on it. And the way they play it off into later on in the movie, they don't tell you whether or not that the judge, you know, was on the take and, like, you know, took a bribe from Raul Julia or something like that. They never reveal it. But in this case, I do believe that they rigged it. Someone rigged it for him to be the judge because it was way too perfect, I think, for a situation. And it seemed like he's the only judge for that to work because the missing case file or whatever was tied to him. So once he learned that the case file was tied to him, he had to make sure that that case file was never found or whatever. So if he called a mistrial, all of that shit goes away. So he found a way to do a mistrial, it seems like. So it seemed like that was very much on purpose that it was drawn to him.
Again, I cannot emphasize enough how incompetent the prosecution was, and the fact that they completely get embarrassed throughout the proceedings. I mean, this is when you have a piece of physical evidence, as they do, when you have just enough of a motive, like clearly Rusty should have gone to jail, but it is because of the prosecution's incompetence and Raul Julia's competence that's why it ends up being the case. I mean, the thing that I appreciate the most about the judge in this case is I think a lot of judges are take no shit, but I think there was always a temptation to have the judge like go after the heroes to make it more of an underdog story. The thing that I appreciate that's different in this case is that he has take no shit on both sides. And when the prosecution is clearly embarrassing themselves, he just completely goes against them and is like, not only is Rusty innocent and not only is this trial going to end, but we apologize to you for even thinking you could have done this. Basically, I mean, again, just bitch slapping them. And that's the part that I like, is that he not only, again, and this part of it is because he's probably on the take, but I love the idea that not only does he end the trial, but he's like, the prosecution is completely incompetent.
Yeah, and I really like that too, because it felt like at times you wanted to just smack those two lawyers, right? Because it just seemed like it's like they knew that he didn't do it, but they just wanted him out of the way. And that's kind of the implication, and that's part of that whole political conspiracy theory that was trying to be implemented by Raul Julia's character, which you would think would like not be admissible in court, because like you can't just throw out random conspiracy theories to the fucking jury. I mean, that's going to confuse them. And the judge let it happen, and it worked, because now it created this idea that the whole system was against Harrison Ford, which they kind of were, because they just wanted him out of the way, whether or not he was the killer. So it felt like this murder was this like this convenient thing that happened for him, because they wanted Harrison Ford out, and then they just tried to pin it on him. So it was like this weird convenient thing, and then they just lost it, because of course they lost the prime thing of evidence, do you want to talk about the mug right now? I feel like this is the perfect time to talk about the mug.
I think we have to it's a glass, it's not a mug.
Sorry, a glass. Harrison Ford was believed to be in the apartment the night of the murder of the victim, right? He wasn't, right? Let's get the facts straight. He was not there that night, right?
Right. He was not there. His wife was the one who was there because she did the deed.
And she planted the glass with his fingerprints that he, used earlier. So it made it seem like he was there, even though he wasn't. So that was the one thing that he couldn't find any defense for. So what did his friend do? His friend hides the glass in his desk for God knows how long, and no one asked him about it. And technically it's fine, because if no one asked you about where it was, and you just didn't know what to do with this piece of evidence because you were taken off the case, so to speak, and you just had it in your desk, technically that's nothing wrong with that. So if his friend found his loophole, got him out of it, because now there's no glass for the prosecution to present to the jury. And of course the jury is just like, well, now this looks like you're just making up the evidence, right? So that helps the case, and very well done, because they're just thinking okay, what's going to happen with this? Was there actually a glass there? And then you find out there was, and then it adds to the confusion, because this is before the reveal that it was planted there. So they're having that discussion on the boat after the mistrial. They're just like, bro, I didn't do it, man. He's telling his friend he didn't do it, and then the guy's like, well, I don't know who did it either, but he just, whatever, man, you're safe now. And they threw the glass out. So then at that moment, the audience, including, I'm talking about me and probably the whole audience in 1990, was just like, well, then who did it if it wasn't Harrison Ford, right? And then the big reveal towards the end with the hatchet and everything. But I mean, it was a good thing. It's not a MacGuffin necessarily, but it was a good thing to a good piece of evidence to present to the audience. And once you not have it present there, it adds to it, and then it becomes this story of, well, where is it? And then the big reveal of where it was the whole time was a good payoff.
Yes, I think part of the idea also is that the prosecution is putting so much of its eggs into that basket because the glass is so damning that they forgot about the murder weapon. I think that's also the idea, is that the prosecution is being distracted by this knockout piece of physical evidence. They don't even bother to look for the murder weapon, which the murder weapon would tell you a lot. And I want to know, so the murder weapon, apparently it was not, because they did have a warrant for the house. Did they just not go into the garage?
See, that's the thing. I think she hid it and then hid it again. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? She hid it from knowing that they were searching the house, and then she put it later on in the toolbox, just thinking okay, they're not going to come and search for the house. That was my impression, because I thought that too. Because once the revelation happened, you start thinking about the past scenes and her behavior and things like that, and then you realize, well, they never found the murder weapon, but it was at the house. But then she must have, hid it while they were searching the house, because there is a scene where they come in with the search warrant. So it's they choose scenes very specific in this movie that makes you question things. But then once you start putting the pieces together, it start making sense. And that, from my perspective, she hid it during the search because, I mean, she's the one at the house the whole time. She's like, the house. She's at the house all the time. She's that stay-home mom, so to speak, that had her career lift off. Well, the husband's out all the time, not knowing what's going on. It makes perfect sense to me.
I would agree. And yeah, I mean, this is just an extremely well executed movie, top to bottom. And again, when you have somebody like Alan J. Pakula directing, I mean, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get just a well executed, rock solid piece of entertainment. And again, with Gordon Willis, you're going to get a movie that feels real, and it's going to look good, and the world is going to feel very lived in. And I think in terms of the strengths, I mean, this is an all-timer ending. The ending is just, it's so good. That's all you can say. Bonnie Bedelia in the final scene, I think she does a great job. I know you're not as high on her, but I mean, she's good throughout, but I think specifically...
I think she did an incredible job. I think she's like on par with almost Raul Julia with that monologue at the end. I just wish the monologue happened on the stand. That way the whole jury is just like living in like the audience, you know what I mean? And just experiencing the revelation, and then you see the reactions to the jury. I wanted to see that because I wanted to see the other people's reactions to it. But because they have to keep it a secret, it doesn't make sense to the plot. But I feel like if you do a remake in today's era, I would do it that way, somehow fit it in where she's...
Well, it's funny you say that because there's two things to say. The book, it is never made clear that she did the deed. And the monologue that was said by her is actually said by Rusty. Rusty's the one who gives the monologue in the book, and she never admits to anything. So I think for the purposes of a movie, again, something that comes out in the summer, I think they just want to be more clear. This is also something that is getting an Apple TV. I'm not sure if it's Apple or Paramount. I think it's Apple because this is a Warner Brothers movie. So this is also going to be an Apple Plus miniseries, and Ruth Negga has been cast in the Bonnie Bedelia role. So I'm not sure.
Oh my goodness! This is 3 weeks in a row we've talked about a remake or a reboot, and I guess people just love rebooting Harrison Ford stuff because it just seems to work. So that's what we're doing nowadays. So listen, if they give me the
we're
ending,
just rebooting everything.
I'll be in. And give me Giancarlo Esposito as the lawyer. In. Give me Vincent D'Onofrio in the Brandetti role. In. Please. Please.
I mean, but the problem is if you know the ending, I don't think a TV show is going to be nearly as fun.
I mean, I don't think a lot of people have seen this anyway. I think the modern audience, in terms of 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds that are just discovering something like a Fatal Attraction, probably are not going to go back and watch the old movie first. That's what I'm saying. I think they're going to just be like,
Perhaps.
oh, what's this show? So I think if you're going with that perspective, then if you don't know the ending, put it in the fucking courtroom. Because I think that would have been, can you imagine Raul Julia's reaction if he found that out in the courtroom? That would have been unbelievable, I think. But I get it. They had to, keep it secret because the family has to be safe at the end. But if you want to do a modern take, give us that shock. And, I think it would be an incredible scene to watch.
So yeah, some really great supporting performances, and John Williams' main theme. It's pretty simple, but it just works, and those are all my strengths. Anything else to add or contribute?
Yeah, I mean, John Williams. The score is minimalist, and for John Williams, I've never experienced that before, and I'm very much a minimalist in terms of graphic design most of the time. But in terms of minimalism, the idea is, less is more. And in this case, it fucking worked because it was just kind of haunting, this little piano theme he was playing. I don't know. It's very few notes, but it works, and it's just recurring. And and it plays a lot during a lot of Rusty scenes. And then it played a lot during the Rusty flashbacks. Just it was sort of creepy, but kind of comforting at the same time. It's very hard to explain because it's when you hear this music, it's like you trying to figure out this murder mystery, and then you're just trying to remember the details of the murder, but then you're also thinking about Harrison Ford and his wit. So it's this weird mix to it. But because I think any score that's kind of heavy would not work for a movie like this, because you need the drama and the dialogue to speak for itself. So that's why I think he took the minimalist approach. And just the amazing cast. I mean, I don't know who the casting director is. I should look into that, but goddamn, credit to them because they put a hell of a cast together, and they knew what they were doing for the roles they were trying to portray. I guess I'm pro Harrison Ford in the role. You're kind of what? Still anti?
I'm agnostic, I would say. I think it's tough. I think this is a tough role because I think Rusty the character is inherently kind of a bore and kind of not that interesting. And maybe in 1990 this was a more interesting character, but I think we've just seen this version done to death so much, and we've seen
my
so many of
recasting
these
would
movies
be
now.
Jeff Goldblum. I think Jeff Goldblum or Sam Neill. I know I'm going Jurassic Park with this, but
I think
seriously,
it's funny.
But
I
that
would
they
say
can
like
play it. They can play like this, because what I interpret from this role is that this guy grew up as a nerd, and that this is the first time he was really getting attention from that like hot girl for the first time. And when he took it away, he kind of lost it, and that's where he got the obsession from. And he became that dude in high school who's calling and calling, like, how come you don't want to talk to me anymore? How come you don't want to see me anymore? That whole obsession gimmick that happens when a relationship goes south, and certain people didn't take it seriously, and one person took it seriously, and yeah, that's what happens.
I would even classify his wife as kind of a nerd, given she was number one in her class. And I think Carolyn is a nerd in her own right, but she's, I think, kind of the sexy nerd. That's the vibe that they're going for. And I think the other big weakness is they can't really decide. Like, they're clearly trying to both portray her as kind of this do-gooder, but they're also slut-shaming her. And they never really give us they never define Carolyn as a character. And I think that also hurts because, again, she is like the centerpiece of the movie in a lot of ways, but I think she gets marginalized just in terms of her portrayal.
Yeah, I didn't feel comfortable about it at all, actually. Like, that's one of the things because I gave this movie a strong 9 out of 10, but I was like, I'm about to give it a 9.5, and I just felt like, she got really, like, I don't know, like, the slut shaming really hurts. And the fact that it seems like when you first see her in the flashbacks that she's this ambitious character wanting to make change. But then that kind of goes out the window when you find about all the corruption and the takes and all the things going on. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with that one, because I felt like they made her seem like she was just trying to sleep her way to the top when she wasn't initially trying to sleep her way to the top. And then did she just end up doing that? So, and then the way that she kind of ended it with Rusty was kind of like, okay, it was like a power move kind of thing, that whole relationship, and Rusty doesn't want to accept that. So from my perspective, that's kind of where I kind of wish that if her relationship with Rusty was more of like a romantic one, then I think that would have been better. Like if they were more closer, than just this kind of like fling that kind of happened. But I think that's just kind of like a different take on it that they could have done.
For sure. So let's get to the awards. Best performance. This was a real struggle for me. I was very much stuck between like 4 people, none of whom was Harrison Ford. I have settled on Raul Julia. I think he gets to carry the second hour of this movie. I think he gets the best dialogue. I think he gets the best scenes. For me, it's Raul Julia.
Yeah, me too. And kind of going on our theme of like, the Academy Awards fucking up that year. Let's look at the Best Supporting Actor nominations, shall we? Joe Pesci won for Goodfellas, all-time role, no doubt about that. Compared to Raul Julia, he probably deserves the win. Other people that were nominated: Andy Garcia and Godfather 3. Look, I am a Godfather 3 defender, but come on, Andy Garcia was not on that level for an Oscar nomination.
That is where Raul Julia for Andy Garcia is the easy replacement. I agree with you. Joe Pesci 100% deserved the Academy Award for Goodfellas. I could make an argument he should have been a double nominee for Home Alone 2. Home Alone 1.
I mean, I get you. But again, this was also the year that Pacino got nominated for Dick Tracy.
Also bad. I would have put Brian Dennehy in there instead.
Yeah. So there you go. That's kind of like our continuing theme for Harrison Ford month of where the Oscars got it wrong. Because definitely Raul Julia for sure got robbed of a nomination in this one. I mean, in like I said, in a cast full of like these great performers, and him going toe to toe with Brian Dennehy, and he comes out shining, and he didn't really have to like be bombastic or like be loud. He just was like calm and collective, and we have to get your defense for this and your defense for this. And then when he had to perform in court, he performed, and like he was very competent. But not only that, he had that charm that Raul Julia has always with him. So it just added to it. And I feel like anything Raul Julia did made the movie better. And I felt like every movie he did, he made better.
Totally agree. MVP, as you know, for this entire month and for July, I'm giving it to the screenwriters in honor of the writer's strike. And in this case, I'm giving it to Frank Pearson and Alan J. Pakula, both credited screenwriters for Presumed Innocent. Brian, your MVP.
I have to agree because this script is just incredible. Just the only thing is like the lack of female characters and the way that, they're portrayed. But other than that, like the big reveal and everything was just, tremendous stuff. And the way that it makes you think and go back to previous scenes. That's what a good murder mystery script is supposed to do. Good suspense is supposed to do. And it clicks very well. And I like this more than Witness, and I definitely more than Mosquito Coast. But yeah, this script, I think, was just tremendous work. And it had like almost like this, like a Glenn Ross kind of vibe to it, almost like a stage play kind of vibe to it, which is fine because, again, I kind of missed that from, these like mid-level budgeted movies made for like adults with, mature actors in them. You know what I mean? Like I kind of missed that from the 90s, early 2000s. So yeah, like I mentioned before, the big summer movie this year is Mission Impossible. And barely any of those like, dramas or anything like that, or, maybe small comedies, but like mid-level dramas are far in between, and they're usually going straight to streaming now. So thank God we have a movie like Air, like I mentioned, to kind of break that mold. But yeah, like, because if this were to come out today, not before the whole remake stuff, this would probably be a streaming thing, I think. Like, I don't think this would make money.
This would be a streaming limited series. And in fact, they're remaking it. And what is it going to be? It's going to be a streaming limited series. So that's just the reality, and it's unfortunate. But that's where we're at. This was a very good selection, I would say. I would give this a 7.5 or an 8. Not as good on second viewing, but I think just the performances are still tremendous. So we have one more Harrison Ford performance that we are going to be discussing, and it is another unique one. As we've kind of gone a little bit deeper into the filmography, we are going to look at a Robert Zemeckis movie that literally may have only gotten made because it kept the crew of Castaway together. We are going to be looking at What Lies Beneath with Harrison Ford and Michelle Pfeiffer next week, and I'm very excited. You have never seen this. And it's unfortunate that you've been spoiled on it, because I would have loved to have gotten your thoughts unspoiled. But we will be discussing What Lies Beneath next week.
Yeah, I'm excited because, I remember back in 2001 when this came out, my mom rented it. And it was one of those movies that she would say, like, Brian, stay quiet. It's suspense. And it's one of the suspense movies that she loves. And I think Witness was one of them years ago. But I'm pretty sure she saw Presumed Innocent too, and she never told me. But yeah, I kind of remember watching parts of it with my mom when she said that as I was walking, and passing by the living room or whatever. But yeah, so I'm excited because I don't want to spoil the spoiler that I know, but it really puts things in perspective, because you think Harrison Ford is going to be typecast in all these roles as the hero, but maybe not so much.
So for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.
I wish Bonnie Bedelia was in like Die Hard 3 now based on this performance, but I mean, this is definitely a make good for Die Hard 2. That's for sure.